The man who called himself James Peterson existed in a world of concrete and echoes. His universe was a subterranean parking garage, levels P1 through P4, a place where the air tasted of cold exhaust and damp cement. Each day was a metronome of predictable sounds: the squeal of tires on painted asphalt, the electronic chirp of a car alarm being set, the hollow slam of a door, and the rhythmic thump of his own worn-out boots on the grimy floor. He was the sole parking attendant for the evening shift at the Blackwood Tower, a monolith of glass and steel that scraped the sky. A building he never entered. His domain was the foundation, the unseen, unthought-of underbelly. His life was a fortress built of routine. Arrive at 4 in the afternoon, relieve the day shift attendant with a silent nod, walk the levels, checking for any irregularities, sit in his small, glass-walled booth, a fishbowl of fluorescent light, reading paperback novels with cracked spines. He would take the keys from people who couldn't be bothered to find their own space, his hands calloused and sure as he accepted the warm metal. He would park their gleaming machines, symbols of a life he had once known and had deliberately fled, with an unnerving precision, fitting them into tight spots with inches to spare. Then he would return to his booth, to the quiet hum of the ventilation system, and wait. James was a ghost in his own life. His name was not his own. His past was a locked room, the key thrown into a river of painful memories. The man he had been, alias Vance, a name once whispered with awe and fear in the boardrooms of global finance, was dead. Elias Vance had been a prodigy, a kingmaker, a destroyer of companies. He had built an empire on intellect and nerve, only to see it crumble through a single devastating betrayal that had cost him everything. Not just his fortune, but his faith in the world, in himself. So he had vanished, shedding his identity like a snake sheds its skin, and found refuge in the one place no one from his old life would ever look: a parking garage, wearing a cheap polyester uniform with a name tag that meant nothing. His current existence was a form of penance. The anonymity was a balm on a burn that never quite healed. Here, he was invisible. He was the background noise of other people's important lives. He was the man you handed your keys to without making eye contact, the man you forgot the second you stepped into the elevator. This invisibility was his shield. It kept the ghosts of his past at bay. He owned nothing but a few changes of clothes, a small library of used books, and a single crippling secret. A secret that took the form of a bearer bond, a piece of paper locked in a humble safety deposit box at a downtown bank, a loan so vast it could, if called, shatter the very foundations of the Blackwood dynasty, the family that owned the tower in which he now worked. He had acquired it during his downfall, a final desperate move in a game he had lost, and he held it not as a weapon, but as a reminder of his own failure. One Tuesday evening, the routine was shattered. A silver sports car, a machine that looked more like a weapon than a vehicle, screamed down the ramp to P2, its engine a furious, arrogant roar that violated the garage's usual quiet. It stopped abruptly in the middle of the driving lane, blocking access to 24 empty spaces. Elias watched from his booth, his jaw tightening. He knew the car. It belonged to Tristan Blackwood, the 20-something heir to the entire Blackwood empire. Tristan stepped out of the car. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Elias earned in 6 months, his hair perfectly coiffed, his face set in a mask of casual disdain. He saw Elias approaching, and a smirk twisted his lips. He didn't move the car. He simply stood there waiting. "You're in the lane," Elias said, his voice flat and even. It was the voice he reserved for his job, devoid of any emotion. Tristan laughed, a short barking sound. "I know. That's why you're here, isn't it?" "To take care of it." He dangled the keys from his index finger. "My father's having a late dinner at the top. I'm meeting him. I'm late." Elias held out his hand for the keys. He felt a familiar, cold anger beginning to coil in his stomach, the ghost of the man he used to be. The man who would have crushed this arrogant boy without a second thought. But he was James now. James was patient. James was invisible. Instead of placing the keys in Elias's palm, Tristan let them drop to the floor. They landed with a cheap clatter on the oil-stained concrete. "Oops," Tristan said, his smirk widening. "Clumsy me. Pick them up." The air grew thick and heavy. For a moment the world seemed to slow down. Elias looked from the keys on the ground to the young man's smug face. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and walk away, to let this boy's insolence hang in the air. But that would mean losing his job, losing the fragile piece of his anonymous life. More than that, it would mean he had let Tristan win. He had let the world he ran from reach down into his sanctuary and touch him. He thought about the bearer bond. He thought about the sheer destructive power he held in his hands. The power to turn this boy's entire world to ash. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. This child, draped in the wealth that Elias himself secretly controlled, was commanding him to kneel. Slowly, deliberately, Elias bent down. His knees protested. He felt the eyes of Tristan on his back, a physical weight of contempt. He wrapped his fingers around the cool metal of the key fob. As he straightened up, he met Tristan's gaze. He did not let his own eyes waver. There was no anger in his expression, no humiliation. There was only a profound, unsettling emptiness, a void that seemed to swallow Tristan's petty cruelty whole. "I'll park it for you," Elias said, his voice still perfectly level. The lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Tristan more than any outburst would have. The boy's face flushed. "You know my father pays you to be a servant. You should remember that you're nothing. Just a uniform." He jabbed a finger at Elias's chest. "A nobody." Elias didn't flinch. He simply stood there holding the keys, a statue of quiet dignity. Tristan, seeing he could get no further reaction, let out a frustrated scoff, turned on his heel, and stalked toward the elevators. Elias watched him go. The word nobody echoed in the vast, empty space. He looked down at the keys in his hand, the blackwood crest glinting under the fluorescent lights. A nobody. He almost smiled. If only the boy knew. He got into the car, the scent of expensive leather and cologne filling his nostrils. It was a familiar smell, a ghost from his past. He parked the car with his usual care, then walked back to his booth, the fragile peace of his evening shattered. An hour later, the elevator doors slid open again. This time it was an older man who stepped out, his face etched with the lines of stress and power. He had the same arrogance set to his jaw as his son, but his eyes held a weary intelligence that Tristan lacked. It was Arthur Blackwood, the patriarch, the king of the empire. He walked with a purpose, his expensive shoes clicking sharply on the concrete. He was heading for a different car, a stately black sedan. Elias stepped out of his booth, holding the keys to the sedan, ready to perform his duty. He had retrieved them from the key locker, as he always did when he knew Mr. Blackwood was leaving. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," Elias said, his voice the respectful monotone of James Peterson. Arthur Blackwood barely glanced at him, his mind clearly elsewhere. He reached for the keys, his gaze distant. "Yes, good eve." His words caught in his throat. His hand froze midair, inches from the keys. His eyes, which had swept over Elias without recognition a second before, now snapped into sharp focus. The blood drained from his face. His expression shifted from casual dismissal to stunned disbelief, and then to a dawning, stomach-churning horror. The powerful, unflappable Arthur Blackwood stood utterly frozen, staring at his parking attendant as if he had just seen a ghost. "You!" Arthur whispered, the word barely audible. It was a sound of pure shock. Elias met his gaze. The mask of James Peterson did not slip, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of the old fire. The man who had been dead for 5 years was suddenly, terrifyingly, standing before him in a cheap polyester uniform. "Hit! Can't!" B. Arthur stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "Elias Vance." Elias said nothing. He simply held out the keys, his expression unreadable. But in that silence, in that single unwavering gaze, Arthur Blackwood saw the truth. He saw the man who had disappeared off the face of the earth, the man who held the single greatest threat to his family's legacy, the man his son had just humiliated. He saw the ghost who held the loan that could bring his entire dynasty crashing down into ruin, and he was holding the keys to his car. Arthur Blackwood's hand trembled as he finally took the keys. The metal felt ice-cold against his skin. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the face of his parking attendant, a face he had last seen across a polished mahogany table during a brutal negotiation years ago. A face he had thought and hoped he would never see again. "What are you doing here?" Arthur's voice was a strained rasp. The question was absurd. The man was wearing the uniform. He was working here. But the implication was a chasm of terrifying possibilities. Elias finally allowed a small, almost imperceptible movement at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile. It was something far more unsettling. "Parking cars," he said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with an irony so sharp it was like a razor's edge. "It's a living." Arthur stared, his mind racing, trying to connect the dots. Elias Vance, the phantom of the financial world, the architect of some of the most complex hostile takeovers in modern history, was parking his car. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. He remembered the final chaotic days of Vance's fall. The rumors, the whispers, the disappearance. And he remembered the debt, the massive untraceable bearer bond from a defunct European bank that Vance had acquired in the chaos, a bond collateralized against a core holding company of Blackwood Industries, a doomsday weapon that had vanished along with its owner. "Until now, my son," Arthur began, his throat dry. He had seen Tristan's sports car parked neatly in its spot. He could only imagine the interaction that had taken place. Tristan's casual cruelty was a known liability. Arthur felt a wave of nausea. "Did you speak with my son?" "He was in a hurry." Elias replied the simple sentence carrying a universe of unspoken meaning. He didn't need to say more. He knew Arthur could picture the scene perfectly. Arthur closed his eyes for a brief moment, a captain on the bridge of a ship that had just struck an iceberg. When he opened them, the fear was warring with a lifetime of ingrained authority. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Not here. My office." "Now," Elias shook his head slowly. "My shift ends at midnight, Mr. Blackwood. You know the rules. The attendant must remain on duty." He was using the banal regulations of his menial job as a shield, turning Arthur's own world of rules and hierarchies against him. The power dynamic had been inverted so completely, so suddenly, it left Arthur breathless. Here he was, one of the most powerful men in the city, being stonewalled by his valet. "This is not a request, Vance," Arthur hissed, his composure starting to crack. "And I am not Elias Vance," Elias countered smoothly. "My name is James Peterson. It says so on my tag." He gestured vaguely to his chest. "I park cars. If you need to discuss something, you can leave a message with my supervisor. He'll be in at 8 in the morning." With that, Elias turned and walked back toward his glass booth, the picture of a humble employee finishing his task. He left Arthur Blackwood standing alone in the echoing garage, the keys to his kingdom feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. Arthur watched him go, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This wasn't about money anymore. Not entirely. This was about pride, humiliation, and the terrifying, unpredictable nature of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The ghost in his garage held his entire world on a string. and his own son had just handed him the scissors. For the rest of his shift, Elias sat in his booth and tried to read his book, but the words blurred on the page. The carefully constructed peace of his sanctuary had been breached. The past had come roaring back, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing man. He felt the old adrenaline, the thrill of the fight stirring in his veins for the first time in years. It was a feeling he had sworn off, a drug he had promised himself he would never touch again, and it terrified him. He had chosen this life, this purgatory, for a reason. To be James Peterson was to be safe, to be numb, to let the world spin on without him. But Arthur's recognition and Tristan's insult before it had been like a defibrillator to his dormant soul. He was awake now, and he wasn't sure if he was grateful or horrified. At midnight he locked the booth, performed his final patrol of the silent, tomb-like garage, and walked out into the cool night air. The city lights seemed brighter, sharper. The world felt different. He walked the 8 blocks to his small apartment, the entire way feeling the weight of Arthur Blackwood's panicked gaze on his back. His usual routine after work was to eat a simple meal and fall into an exhausted sleep, but not tonight. Tonight he went to the small diner on the corner, a place called the Daily Grind. The fluorescent lights inside were warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold glare of the garage. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was comforting, real. He took a seat at the counter. A woman with tired but kind eyes and a welcoming smile slid a menu in front of him. Her name was Clara. She had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, and they were the closest thing Elias had to a human connection in his cloistered world. He came here most nights not always to eat, but to simply be in the presence of their simple, unvarnished decency. "The usual, James?" Clara asked, already pouring him a cup of coffee. He nodded. "Please, Clara?" She studied his face for a moment. "Tough night. You look different." He managed a small smile. "Just a long one." He didn't know how to explain it to her. How could he tell this woman, who worked double shifts to pay for her daughter's school supplies, that he held the fate of a billion-dollar empire in his hands? How could he explain that the man she knew as James, the quiet guy who read books at the counter, was a phantom who had just come back to life? As he sipped his coffee, Lily came out from the back room, where she was supposed to be finishing her homework. She was a bright spark of a child, with her mother's kind eyes and a startlingly direct way of looking at the world. She ran over and hopped onto the stool next to Elias. "Hi, James," she said, swinging her legs. "Did you park any super-fast cars tonight?" Elias felt the tension in his shoulders ease, just a fraction. Around Lily, the ghosts of Elias Vance seemed to recede. "A silver one," he said. "Very fast." "Was the driver nice?" she asked, her expression serious. The question was so simple, so pure. It cut right through the complexities of his evening. He thought of Tristan's sneer, the keys on the dirty floor. "No," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "He wasn't." Lily's face fell. "That's not good." "Mommy says you have to be nice to people who help you." She reached out and patted his arm with her small hand. "Well, I think you're nice." The simple, unprompted gesture of kindness was like a physical blow. It struck a place deep inside him that he had thought was long dead and buried. It was a reminder of a world where value wasn't measured in dollars or power, but in simple human decency. It was the world he had been seeking when he became James Peterson. He looked from Lily's innocent face to Clara's gentle one. These people were his new reality. They were the reason he had to keep the ghost of Elias Vance buried. Engaging with Arthur Blackwood, unleashing that power, would destroy this. It would pull him back into the vortex of greed and betrayal that he had barely escaped with his soul intact. He made a decision. Then, sitting at the counter of the all-night diner, he would not engage. He would not let Arthur Blackwood draw him back in. He would remain James Peterson, the invisible man. He would go to the bank tomorrow, retrieve the bearer bond from his safety deposit box, and destroy it. He would burn the last bridge to his past and commit himself fully to this quiet, anonymous life. It was the only way to protect himself, and more importantly, the only way to protect the fragile peace he had found in this small corner of the world, with a kind waitress and her daughter. The next morning, Elias awoke with a sense of grim resolve. The decision to destroy the bond felt right, a final act of exorcism. He put on his civilian clothes, worn jeans and a faded gray sweatshirt, and felt like a man putting on a disguise. The uniform of James Peterson had become more his skin than his own had. He walked to the bank, the city bustling around him, a world of ambition and commerce he no longer belonged to. He signed the entry log for the vault, his hand steady. The clerk, a young man with a bored expression, led him into the cold, sterile room lined with metal boxes. Elias inserted his key. The clerk inserted his, and the small door swung open. He reached inside and pulled out the long, manila envelope. It felt heavier than it should. He took it to a private viewing room, a small, wood-paneled cubicle that felt like a confessional. He sat down and slid the document out of the envelope. The paper was crisp, the lettering ornate. It was a relic from another world, a testament to a time when he had moved mountains of money with a single phone call. He stared at the astronomical figure printed on it, a number that could buy and sell lives. It was pure, unadulterated power, distilled onto a single sheet of paper. His plan was to take it, walk out of the bank, and burn it in a public trash can, an unceremonious end for a weapon of mass financial destruction. But as he sat there, staring at it, a flicker of doubt entered his mind. He thought of Tristan Blackwood's face, the casual cruelty. He thought of the system that created boys like that, a system that chewed up and spat out anyone who wasn't born at the top, a system he had once been a master of. Destroying this bond would protect his peace. But would it be justice, or would it be the final act of a coward running from a fight he was uniquely equipped to win? His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again, with a sigh of irritation, he answered, "Hello, Vance. Don't hang up." It was Arthur Blackwood. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "I told you," Elias said coldly. "That's not my name." "Stop it," Arthur pleaded. "Just listen. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're capable of. Name your price, Elias. Anything. Just give me the bond. Let's make this go away. Anything." 5 years ago, those words would have been music to his ears now. They just sounded hollow. "There is no price, Arthur. This was never about money." "Then what is it about?" Arthur demanded, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "Revenge for what? You lost. I didn't betray you. You flew too close to the sun, and you got burned. That's the game." "I'm not playing the game anymore," Elias said. He was about to hang up when Arthur spoke again, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I know about the diner, Elias, the daily grind, the waitress, Clara, her little girl." The blood in Elias's veins turned to ice. The four walls of the viewing cubicle seemed to close in on him. He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What did you say?" "I'm a desperate man," Arthur said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old menace. "Desperate men do things they wouldn't normally do. You've been living a quiet life. It would be a shame if it suddenly got loud. A shame if that nice woman lost her job. A shame if Child Protective Services got an anonymous tip about a mother working late hours leaving her child unsupervised. Things happen. It was a declaration of war. Arthur had crossed a line Elias hadn't even known existed. He had taken the one pure, simple thing in Elias's new life and turned it into a weapon against him. The quiet anger that had been simmering inside him erupted into a cold, focused rage. You have no idea what you've just done, Arthur, Elias said, his voice dangerously soft. I'm just protecting my family. Arthur shot back. You should understand that. You want to be left alone. Then leave me alone. Destroy the bond. Give me proof, and you can go back to your pathetic little life. If you don't, I won't be responsible for the consequences. Arthur hung up. Elias sat in the silence of the vault, the threat echoing in his ears. His plan to burn the bond, to retreat into anonymity, was now in ashes. Arthur had made a fatal mistake. He had not only threatened Elias Vance, the financier. He had threatened James Peterson's world. He had threatened Clara and Lily. He carefully slid the bond back into its envelope. His hands were no longer steady. They were trembling with a fury so profound it felt like a physical force. The decision was no longer his. Arthur had made it for him. This was no longer about hiding from the past. It was about defending the future. He walked out of the bank, not to a trash can, but to a public library. He sat at a computer, the envelope resting on the desk beside him, and he began to type. He wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was a hunter. And the hunt had just begun. Elias spent the next 2 days in a blur of calculated activity. He operated from the shadows using the library's public computers, prepaid burner phones, and untraceable email accounts. The skills he had honed over a lifetime, skills he had tried to forget, came back to him as if he had used them only yesterday. He was no longer James Peterson, the gentle valet. He was Elias Vance, moving unseen through the digital arteries of the financial world. He didn't make a move on the bond itself. That was his queen, to be played only at the very end of the game. Instead, he began a campaign of 1,000 cuts. He used his encyclopedic knowledge of Blackwood Industries' intricate structure, its hidden debts, its over-leveraged assets, and its legally dubious tax shelters. He started small, planting anonymous tips with financial journalists he knew were hungry for a scandal. He leaked carefully selected, non-incriminating data to short sellers, creating whispers and doubts in the market. The Blackwood stock, once a pillar of stability, began to wobble. It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight tremor. But Elias knew how to amplify it. He created a cascade of doubt, a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. He was a phantom pulling strings, and Arthur Blackwood was the puppet dancing on the stage. Unaware of the master above, during this time, he continued to go to work. He put on the uniform of James Peterson and walked the concrete levels of the garage. The routine was no longer a shield, it was camouflage. He saw Tristan Blackwood twice. The young heir, oblivious to the storm gathering around his family, treated Elias with the same casual contempt, tossing his keys with a smirk. Elias simply nodded, his face a mask of subservience, all while knowing he was systematically dismantling the boy's entire world. The duality was dizzying. His visits to the diner became his anchor to sanity. He needed to see Clara and Lily, to remind himself what he was fighting for. But Arthur's threat had poisoned even this sanctuary. He found himself watching the street outside, looking for unfamiliar cars. He felt a constant, low-level hum of anxiety whenever he was near them. He had brought the wolves to their door. One evening he was sitting at the counter when Clara slid a piece of pie in front of him. "On the house," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, his senses immediately on high alert. She sighed, wiping down the counter with a damp cloth. "My landlord. He's selling the building. The new owners are raising the rent, doubling it." She shook her head, a look of weary resignation on her face. "I can't afford it. I don't know what Lily and I are going to do." Elias felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was not a coincidence. "Who are the new owners?" he asked, his voice tight. "Some holding company. Haby Properties or something like that." Haby Properties? Arthur Blackwood. It was a direct attack, a message. Arthur was showing him the reach of his power, demonstrating that he could hurt the people Elias cared about with the stroke of a pen. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Arthur wasn't just threatening them, he was actively making them homeless. "Clara," he began, his mind racing. He had to fix this. "I can help." She gave him a sad, tired smile. "How, James? Are you going to park a few extra cars?" It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it stung nonetheless. To her, he was just James, the man who was barely getting by himself. I have some savings," he lied, the words tasting like ash. "Let me help you with the rent." She reached out and put her hand over his. "That's sweet of you, James. Really, but I can't take your money. We'll figure something out. We always do." Her resilience, her pride, was both admirable and heartbreaking. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't reveal that he was the reason for her suffering, or that he had the means to end it in an instant. Doing so would expose his entire identity, shattering the fragile trust between them and putting her in even greater danger. He felt trapped, a king with an infinite army who was forced to watch his own castle burn. He left the diner that night with a cold fire in his heart. The game had changed. Arthur Blackwood had made it personal. Elias had been trying to win a financial war, but he realized now that wasn't enough. He needed to utterly and completely annihilate the Blackwood Empire, and he needed to do it in a way that would protect Clara and Lily forever. He went not to the library, but to an old, forgotten contact from his past. A man named Julian, a forensic accountant of unparalleled genius and questionable morals, who owed Elias his life. He found him in a dusty, book-filled office above a pawnshop. Julian looked up, his eyes widening behind thick glasses. "Elias, I thought you were dead." "I was," Elias said, tossing a folder onto Julian's desk. "I need you to find everything, every shell corporation, every offshore account, every dirty deal Arthur Blackwood has ever made." "I don't want to wound him, Julian. I want to erase him." Julian opened the folder, his eyes scanning the preliminary data Elias had gathered. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "It will be my pleasure," he said. "Welcome back." The final piece was the most difficult. It required him to confess in a way to Clara. He couldn't tell her everything, but he had to tell her something. He had to bridge the gap between James the valet and Elias, the man who could save her. He found her the next day as she was leaving the diner, a look of profound worry on her face. Lily was holding her hand, her small face mirroring her mother's anxiety. "Clara," he said, his voice earnest. "I need you to trust me." She looked at him, her expression guarded. "James, I know who is doing this to you," he said, cutting her off gently. "The new landlord. It's because of me. He's a powerful man and he's trying to hurt me by hurting you." Clara's eyes widened in fear and confusion. "A powerful man? Because of you, James, you're a parking attendant. What are you talking about?" This was the moment of truth. He took a deep breath. "Before I worked in the garage, I had a different life. I knew this man. I did things I'm not proud of. But I also have resources. I can stop him. I can protect you and Lily. But you have to let me. You have to believe that I can." He saw the conflict in her eyes. The man she knew as James, the quiet, kind, and seemingly powerless man, was telling her he could fight dragons. It didn't make sense. It was a lie or a delusion. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Who are you, really?" He looked down at Lily, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes. "I'm the man who is going to make sure no one ever hurts you again," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "That's all that matters. Please, Clara, just give me a little time. Don't sign anything, don't move. Just trust me." He saw the flicker of a decision in her eyes. It wasn't full trust, not yet. But it was a sliver of hope. A willingness to believe in the impossible because her other options were so bleak. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was all he needed. The confrontation he had been dreading was now inevitable. Clara had not pushed him away, but her trust was a fragile, conditional thing. The revelation of his past, however vague, had created a chasm between them. The man she thought she knew was a fiction, and the truth was a dangerous mystery. He could feel the distance in her guarded glances in the way she held Lily a little closer when he was near. He had wanted to protect her, but he had only succeeded in making her afraid. The pressure from Arthur Blackwood was escalating from financial to physical. One night, as Elias was walking home from the garage, a black town car swerved to the curb beside him. The back window rolled down, and one of Arthur's security men, a hulking figure with a scarred face, stared out at him. "Mr. Blackwood is getting impatient," the man growled. "He wants you to know that his patience has a limit. Next time we won't be so polite." The car then sped off into the night, leaving Elias with a racing heart and the cold realization that Arthur was done with veiled threats. The next day, the true crisis hit. Julian called him on his burner phone. "It's done," Julian said, his voice grim. "I have it all. Bank records from the Caymans, shell companies in Panama, evidence of bribery, market manipulation. It's a masterpiece of corporate malfeasance. Enough to put him away for decades. But there's something else, Elias. Something you need to know." "What is it?" Elias asked. "The betrayal that brought you down 5 years ago, the one who sold you out to your rivals, it wasn't random. The final piece of the puzzle, the one who orchestrated the whole thing from the shadows, it was Arthur Blackwood." The world tilted on its axis. Elias leaned against a brick wall for support, the phone feeling slick in his hand. The man who had ruined him, who had destroyed his life and sent him into exile, was the same man he was now fighting. It was never just business. It was personal from the very beginning. The past 5 years of his life, his penance as James Peterson, had been built on a foundation of Arthur Blackwood's treachery. The rage that filled him was so pure, so absolute, it burned away everything else. He was so consumed by this revelation that he almost missed the second call. It was from Clara. Her voice was frantic, choked with panic. "James! They were here!" he cried. "2 men. They came into the diner. They didn't do anything. They just sat there, staring. Lily was so scared. They said to give you a message. They said, 'Time's up.'" The rage curdled into ice-cold fear. Arthur had broken his promise. He had sent his thugs directly to her. "To Lily! Where are you now?" Elias demanded, his voice a low command. "I locked the door. We're in the back office, James." "I'm so scared. What is going on? Who are you?" Her voice broke. "This is because of you. You brought this to us. I can't have this. I can't have my daughter living in fear. You need to leave. Stay away from us, please. I need you to leave." Each word was a hammer blow. "Clara, listen to me." "No," she sobbed. "I can't. Just go. Don't call. Don't come here. Just stay away." The line went dead. He stood on the street corner, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. He had been cast out. The one person whose trust he valued above all else now saw him as a monster, a source of danger. He had tried to be a protector, but he had become the threat itself. The fortress of his new life had crumbled, and he was alone in the wreckage. He stumbled back to his small, empty apartment. The books on the shelf seemed to mock him. The quiet that he had once cherished now felt like a suffocating shroud. "Ured." He sank onto his bed, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He was Elias Vance again, the man who brought ruin to everything he touched. He had lost his empire, and now he had lost his soul. The old despair, the one that had driven him into hiding 5 years ago, washed over him, and he let it pull him under. He was back where he started, alone, broken, and with no hope left. He had failed. All was lost. For hours Elias lay in the darkness of his room, adrift in a sea of self-loathing. He had flown too close to the sun once before and been burned. This time he had tried to stay on the ground, and he had ended up dragging the people he cared about into the fire with him. Clara's words echoed in his mind. Stay away from us. It was a judgment, a final verdict on the man he was Sipti, a poison. His burner phone, which he had tossed onto his nightstand, began to vibrate. He ignored it. It was probably Julian, with more details of Arthur's depravity, or worse, Arthur himself, with another threat. It didn't matter anymore. He had already lost. The phone stopped, then immediately began to vibrate again, a persistent, desperate buzzing. He reached for it, intending to smash it against the wall. But as his fingers closed around the cheap plastic, he saw the caller ID. It wasn't an unknown number. It was the landline from the diner. His heart seized in his chest. Clara had told him not to call, not to come near. Why would she be calling him? He answered, his hand trembling. Clara. But it wasn't her voice. It was a small, high-pitched whisper, trembling with fear. James. It was Lily. Lily. What's wrong? Is your mom okay? Mommy's crying, the little girl whispered. She locked the door, but she's really sad. She told me not to call you, but I'm scared, James. The bad men, are they coming back? The child's voice, so full of fear, and yet so full of trust in him, cut through the fog of his despair like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't a judgment, it was a plea. He was not a monster to her. He was James, the man who parked the fast cars, the man she believed could help. In that instant, something inside him shifted. The self-pity, the despair, it all burned away, replaced by a singular, clarifying purpose. He was not the poison. Arthur Blackwood was, and he was the only one who held the antidote. Clara's fear had pushed him away, but Lily's faith had just pulled him back. He would not fail her. No, Lily, he said, his voice suddenly calm and clear, filled with a conviction that surprised even himself. They are not coming back. I'm going to make sure of it. I promise. Now can you do something for me? Can you give the phone to your mom? He heard a sniffle, then Clara's shaky voice. James? I told you. I know what you told me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. But I just made a promise to your daughter. I intend to keep it. I'm ending this. Tonight, lock your doors, stay inside, and don't open them for anyone but me. Do you understand? There was a long pause. He could hear her ragged breathing. What are you going to do? She whispered. I'm going to remind a man named Arthur Blackwood what true power looks like, he said. He hung up the phone before she could reply. He stood up, a new man. The ghost of Elias Vance and the heart of James Peterson had finally merged. He was no longer hiding, and he was no longer running. He was going to war, not for revenge, not for money, but for a little girl who was scared in the back room of a diner. He walked over to his closet and pulled out a small, locked footlocker from under a pile of old clothes. He opened it. Inside, nestled amongst a few mementos from his former life, was a sleek encrypted satellite phone and a laptop. He hadn't touched them in 5 years. He sat at his small kitchen table, opened the laptop, and powered it on. The screen glowed to life, a portal to his old world. He placed the bearer bond on the table beside him. Then he made his first call. The phone on Arthur Blackwood's penthouse desk rang at 2 in the morning. He answered it, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. What? It's over, Arthur, Elias said. Arthur sat bolt upright. Vance, did you get my message? Have you come to your senses? Oh, I've come to my senses, Elias said, his voice radiating a chilling calm. I just wanted you to be awake for this. Open your laptop. Go to the homepage of any major financial news network. Arthur, confused and unnerved, did as he was told. His blood ran cold. The headline just posted seconds ago read, Blackwood Industries facing insolvency. Leaked documents allege massive fraud. What have you done? Arthur choked out. That's just the appetizer, Elias said. He made a few keystrokes. Now check your personal accounts. The ones in the Caymans. Ones you thought no one knew about, frantically. Arthur tried to log in. Access denied. They're frozen. How? I have a friend who is very good with numbers, Elias said, thinking of Julian. He found everything, Arthur, including your role in my downfall 5 years ago. It turns out this was always personal. You just didn't know I was the one you were playing against. He picked up the bearer bond. And now for the main course. He dialed the number on his satellite phone, a direct line to the chairman of the banking consortium in Zurich that now serviced the defunct bond. Herr Schmidt, please, he said in flawless German. A sleepy voice came on the line. Schmidt. This is Elias Vance, he said. I am calling to execute the lien on bearer bond 74 Delta. The collateral is a majority share in the Blackwood North American Holding Company. I am calling the debt in full effective immediately. On the other end of the line in his penthouse, Arthur Blackwood let out a strangled cry. It was the sound of a king being dethroned, the sound of an empire turning to dust. You're ruined, Arthur, Elias said into his phone, his voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a cold finality. You threatened a child. You terrorized a woman who has done nothing but work hard her entire life. You built your kingdom on deceit and cruelty, and now it is gone. You are the nobody now. He hung up the phone on Arthur's incoherent sputtering. He looked at the bearer bond, the weapon he had almost destroyed. He had used its power not for personal gain, but for justice. He closed the laptop. The war was over. He had won. He hadn't just vanquished his antagonist, he had become the man he was always meant to be. A man with the mind of Elias Vance and the heart of James Peterson, and now he had a promise to keep. 1 year later, the sign on the frosted glass door was simple and elegant. Vance & Associates, Ethical Investment and Community Trust. It wasn't a towering skyscraper, but a modest 3-story brick building in a respectable but not ostentatious part of the city. The firm Elias had founded was unlike any other on the street. Its mission wasn't to generate obscene wealth, but to invest in community projects, to fund small businesses with big ideas, and to provide financial literacy programs for those who needed them most. He had used the ashes of the Blackwood Empire to fertilize a garden of opportunity for others. Inside, the office was bright and airy. Elias sat at a simple wooden desk, not a mahogany throne. He was reviewing a proposal for a new low-income housing development. He wore a simple button-down shirt, no tie. The hunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet, confident calm. He was no longer hiding or fighting. He was building. The door to his office opened, and Clara walked in. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform anymore. She was the firm's outreach coordinator. Her innate empathy and decency, now her professional tools. She placed a cup of coffee on his desk, her smile warm and genuine. The community center board just approved the funding for the after-school program, she said. Thanks to you. He looked up at her, his heart swelling with a love so profound it still sometimes took his breath away. After that fateful night, after the fall of Blackwood, he had gone to the diner. He had sat down at the counter and told her everything. The whole truth about his past, his wealth, his fall, and his fight. He had laid his broken soul bare, expecting her to run. But she hadn't. She had listened, and when he was finished, she had simply reached across the counter, taken his hand, and said, "It's over now, Elias. Welcome home." Their life together had been built not on the fiction of James Peterson, but on the truth of Elias Vance, the redeemed man. They had bought the diner, ensuring the previous owner a comfortable retirement, and turned it into a co-op run by its employees. They had bought Clara's apartment building, not through a shell corporation, but in her name, and she had immediately lowered the rents for all the tenants. "Lily's soccer practice is at 5, Clara reminded him, pulling him from his thoughts. "I'll be there," he promised. Lily's safety and happiness had become the unwavering compass of his life. The fear he had once seen in her eyes had been replaced by the carefree joy of a child who knows she is safe and loved. Later that afternoon, Elias found himself with some time to spare. On an impulse, he drove to a part of town he hadn't visited in a year. He parked his modest sedan on the street and walked to the entrance of the Blackwood Tower. It had a new name now, the City Center Tower, owned by a consortium of ethical pension funds. He walked down the ramp into the subterranean parking garage. The air still smelled the same, of exhaust and damp concrete. He saw the attendance booth, now occupied by a young college student reading a textbook. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. He stood in the spot where Tristan Blackwood had dropped his keys, the spot where he had been called a nobody. He remembered the humiliation, the cold rage. It felt like a scene from someone else's life. The man who had stood here a year ago was a ghost, a shell. The man standing here now was whole. He thought of Arthur Blackwood, a broken man living in obscurity, his name a footnote in financial history. He thought of Tristan, forced to get a real job, stripped of the unearned privilege that had defined him. Elias felt no pity, but also no lingering hatred. They were simply relics of a past he had moved beyond. His journey had started in this cold, concrete tomb, a self-imposed prison for his wounded soul. He had believed that to be safe, he had to be invisible, to be nothing. But he had learned that true safety, true strength, didn't come from hiding. It came from connection. It came from fighting for something more than yourself. It came from the love of a good woman and the simple, unwavering faith of a child. He turned and walked out of the garage, leaving the echoes and the ghost behind for good. He stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, squinting against the light. His phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Clara. It was Lily, her face beaming, holding up a ridiculously oversized soccer trophy. The caption read, "We won. See you soon, Dad." He smiled a true, unburdened smile. He was not a king, not a ghost, not a valet. He was Elias. He was a partner. He was a father. And he was finally, completely free. He had found his purpose, not in the dizzying heights of finance, but here on the ground, building a life of quiet, meaningful love.